The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is Andre Mayette. I am your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers, and big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again. Today is episode 82, which is Stephen Grant Day, which means we're going to be talking to Stephen Grant, former writer for Marvel Comics. I'm currently writing for a lot of other projects. Did the comic Two Guns, which was made into the movie with Denzel Washington and Mark Wahlberg, as well as a lot of other really cool projects. Worked with a lot of titans of the industry, and he is one himself, and it was a great conversation. And a lot of insight into a bygone era of writing comics and that sort of thing. So it's very cool. And a lot of great insights into comics and the Hollywood system and that sort of thing. If you're listening to this, that means you are hopefully a subscriber to the show. If you're not already, please head on over and do so. If we're on Apple, you can rate as well, which would be great. So rate, subscribe, pass the word on, let other folks know about the goodness that is the show. Hopefully that you think it is. I hope so too as well. Being that I'm recording these far in advance, currently I've just recently watched the first two new episodes of the X-Men cartoon. The 90s cartoon, X-Men 97, is now back on Disney Plus, and it is fantastic. I gotta say, it is a great combination of past nostalgia, but amping it up into like an adult, or at least focused more towards adults. With heavier storylines and more adult storytelling, but also honoring where it came from. New voice actors. The old ones are all there too. It's fantastic. It's such a good show. And if you don't know already, which I'm sure you do if you're listening, I have another podcast, which is X-Rated, the X-Men Anime Review Show, that I do with Davin Skellhorn, and producer of the show. And we also have that coming out as well. So, the episodes, when we talk about these episodes, would have been like a month ago for you guys, but for me, I just watched them when I'm recording this, and it's fantastic. It's so good. Like, I know a lot of these modern nostalgia things are sort of created in order to target people like myself or you that are listening, likely someone who has fond memories of something from their childhood, and so they're bringing back a lot of those properties now, Ghostbusters and all that sort of stuff for Keep Doing It. So they want to tap into you missing your youth and wanting to spend money to revisit it. So that's what they're doing. But this one is fantastic. It's definitely one that's well worth checking out. And if you're not watching it and you love that show, they don't miss a step. It's incredibly good. And I can't gush enough about it. It's fantastic. And also let me know if you guys are out there on the socials about what you think of episodes, comment, all that sort of stuff. I'd like to try to get in as many ears as possible, and the way to do that is if you can pass on the word too, so please do so. And I guess next up we might as well just go right into the episode. So here's my conversation with Stephen Grant. Oh man, I love that Get Carter poster.
Oh yeah, I tend to forget it's there.
Oh really?
Got a Two Guns poster in this wall.
Oh wow.
So
awesome. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. It's been, it's been an interesting week. I haven't gotten any work done this week because we've been reflooring, we've been redoing the floors, and I've been building furniture and things like that. So I haven't gotten a lot of writing done the past couple of days, but
are you one of those
busy.
Are you one of those types that needs everything in your house to be like perfectly homeostasis before you can focus on work?
No, I just have a lot of work, other housework to do, basically. So
Right on.
things need to be done when they need to be done. So
Yeah, I find that
sometimes sometimes the writing just has to go to one side for a little bit. So,
Yeah,
unfortunately, it's always when you've got something that you really want to write.
let it stew a little bit, get it to where you need it to be, I guess, in your head. Um, yeah, I'm one of those types sometimes. I feel like I when I have to do something creative or do work on stuff, I always find that if there's something nagging that needs to be done around the house, I need to go do it first before I can focus on the thing that's not housework.
Well, this isn't a case of nagging because it has to be done. It's going to be done whether
Yeah,
whether I feel like doing it or not. So,
fair enough. Great. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, actually.
Oh, wow. And are you there now?
No,
Are
no,
you-
I'm outside of Las Vegas now. I
Oh.
had enough of Wisconsin winters by the time I got to about 25. So,
What did your folks do in Wisconsin?
my well, they both worked for the phone company actually.
Oh, really?
Back when it was all one phone company.
The one ubiquitous phone company that everybody used.
AT&T, Mother
Yeah.
Bell Telephone.
Wow. And what was growing up in Wisconsin like?
Uh, Dull. No, I actually wasn't bad in Madison because although I didn't realize it at the time I thought it was dull.
Mhm.
Looking back, since the University of Wisconsin was there, there was a lot of stuff going on there that I had access to and, kind of took for granted and,
Mm.
but not no pun intended. And and there was it was interesting. It was the late 60s, so there were lots of protests to go to and things like that. And it was it was educational.
Yeah.
But
Was comics like an escape for you? Was that something that you liked as a kid?
oh yeah, no, well, I'll tell you, I got into comics because I have a theory that the popularity of comics dropped in the 70s and later because childhood diseases were being conquered.
Mm. Really?
Because I got into comics because I measles or mumps or something, one of the three big child. I can't remember whether it was measles, mumps, or chickenpox. It was one of the three. But I guess I watched Westerns on TV. I remember very little about my early TV watching,
Hmm.
but my father had the idea that I liked Westerns. So just because I was stuck in bed, and this was back when I'm revealing my age here. This is back when TVs were fairly monstrous and you couldn't easily move them from room to room.
Hmm.
Now you can just use a phone. Um,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and a phone that you keep in your pocket. But so I was stuck in bed for a week. So my father bought me a comic book, which was oh, I think the third to last issue of All-Star Western.
Hmm. Nice.
And which
Classic.
was yeah, you know, and I wasn't really that fascinated by that, although I liked it. I mean, it was entertaining enough. And I didn't realize that my tastes in art were locked in by
Hmm.
that issue, but I did years later. Um, but flip, going through it, you get to you get to a page that's got this big page of sized house ad, which has a banner across the top saying, "Just imagine." And then an arrow leading off the banner going down, and on the arrow is listing Superman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman. I forget, Anyway, and then the arrow leads down to the logo for Justice League of America, and then you had the comic above the logo there. Yeah, copy of the latest one, which was Justice League #5, which I didn't manage to get until years and years and years later. But I saw that. I had no idea who any of these characters were. I never watched Superman on television. It was just nothing. I had absolutely zero knowledge of any of this stuff. And but I saw that and I just had to get out. Couldn't wait to get out of bed to go, get to the store and get a copy of it get a copy of Justice, because this just looked like I was 7 years old, and I was just thought this was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Which you got to remember, this is 1961, and there were not that many cool things out there. So,
Well, especially like seeing all of those characters in one place and not knowing that they had their own
anything
identities
about
before
any of
that.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Even the
so
names alone
that
would be provocative enough to a kid, you know?
yeah, so that kind of sparked it all. So then I think by the next weekend I was well enough to get out of bed. So, excuse me. So I went running off to Renabomb Rexall Drugs, which was the closest place to buy. It was in a shopping center about 2 miles from my house, and it was the closest place to buy comics. And at the time, comics were still a dime. This is like the dying days of the dime comics. And what they sold them in like these 8-sided kiosks that were behind glass. And they were vending machines for comics, and I've never seen them anyplace else. Like,
Wow.
nobody else seems to know they existed.
I've never heard of that.
No, nobody has. I mean, but I don't know where they came from, but it was like a glass case with a spinner rack inside.
Mm.
And you turned the rack, you used a knob to turn the rack to the comic you wanted, and you put a dime in the slot next to that comic, and then it shoved the comic out at you. But by the time that I got there, Justice League &6 was the only Justice League I could find. So I bought that one instead. And that was the first comic I ever bought. But and from there it just kind of cascaded. And I always, so past that point I always read comics. So,
Yeah. That opened the floodgates, I guess, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Although the one that really did it was the second comic that I bought,
Oh.
which was The Flash 123. Which, if you know the Flash, this was Flash of Two Worlds.
Oh, I was going to say.
The return of the Golden Age. Again, I knew nothing about any of this stuff.
Did you hold on to that one?
But then the second page, this splash page of because they broke them down into chapters in those days.
Mm-hmm.
One issue, it was a complete novel in one issue, and it got to the second page, and it was just a page of the three villains of the Thing, which were these three, the Thinker, the Fiddler, and the Shade, sitting around amid a pile of all this loot that they had stolen in the course of the story. And it's like all these art things, and they're all these noodly, bizarre Carmine Infantino concoctions. And that was something, honest, I had never seen it was like the weirdest thing I'd ever seen in my life to that point. And it was just and that was the page that I think really got me into comics, because it was just like nothing else I could I had any experience of any place else. And and then but that was, I think, the thing that really thought, hey, there's something you can get here that you can't get anyplace else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of locked the idea in, I think. But that was a highly influential page for me, and it had nothing going on in it. So
well, it's captivating to a young person, right? I mean, you bright costumes, colorful characters, the allure of danger with the criminals and villains and all that sort of stuff. I mean, but I know what you mean about the sort of the being stuck in your house with time to read comics. Like the days of that are kind of long gone. I remember even just listening to a podcast with Joe Dante, who I'm a big fan of his films. He had polio when he was a kid, so he watched movies for months until he was healthy enough to be able to leave his home. That kind of instilled in him this love of movies. Right
now, there's just so many venues for so many outlets for your entertainment, for to keep you busy for.
Oh yeah.
But I often wonder how many kids before 1970, well, before videotapes were available, let's say. I wonder how many kids got into comics because they were stuck in bed, and that's what their parents brought them to get in to entertain them. Yeah. So. No, that's actually, I've never thought of that correlation before, but it actually makes a lot of sense. It's kind of definitely perfect. Well, I'm kind of extrapolating from my own experience. Well, still, but I mean, you're right. It's a whole generation. Well, I mean, it's a lot different in the way that even
television as we know it, well, I mean, television as we know it today is a whole other animal, but even television as you knew it back then, it wasn't like, I think the things for kids to watch were on like a Saturday morning, and that was probably it. It was
Right, yeah.
mostly, yeah, it was mostly like news and other things like that. Or so there's a lot more time to fill with reading comics and stuff like that. So were you interested in writing from the get-go, or is that something that came a little later in life?
I kind of think I was. I don't
Hmm.
know if I was or not. I mean, not from the absolute get-go, but by the time I was in my teens, I mean, I was puttering around with stuff,
Hmm.
early, preteens. I mean, it was just a case of it wasn't really like me thinking, wow, I ought to write comics for a living. It was just like getting ideas, and you come up with your own characters and things like that, and you putter with things. And
Hmm.
it wasn't anything that I you know, obsessed about, but it was just something, it was fun,
Hmm.
It was you get to a certain point and you just want to start you have your own ideas, that's all. So I mean, I just kept having my own ideas and kept noodling on them, and and by the time I was in my late teens, I mean, in your head, since I can't draw, this is
Hmm.
my big flaws, I can't draw. Um, you plot out stories, and I see people doing this today. I see people doing the same thing. I mean, people come up to me with the arcs that they've come up with, that they've thought out for, like, 300 issues and things like that, which I tell them not to do. And 'cause the odds on getting it published are pretty insane. Um, but
Publishers don't want you to come with a create your own project that you already have 300 issues for. Come on.
Well, the not even if they did, with the market, the odds on it lasting more than 9 is pretty slim.
Yeah,
I mean, the
absolutely.
odds on, the odds on it making it to 9 are slim enough.
Hmm. Well, it also seems like it's important creatively. I talked to Eric Larson a little while ago, and he had mentioned that everyone thinks that because he's had a comic that's run, Savage Dragon's been running for
Sure.
forever, that he's like people think that he has everything mapped out for decades, and it's like it would be so boring to do that. He said even the idea that he has ideas of where things are going to go, but to have every single meticulous detail worked out is
Well, I mean, the stuff I see now is largely the result of the 70s stuff with, I blame Jim Starlin, because everyone wants to do these cosmic epics that illuminate us on all the mysteries, that reveal the secrets behind all the mysteries of the
Mhm.
universe, which is complete nonsense. Because let me tell you, you don't know them.
Well, that's the allure of
And
writing. You get to pretend you do. So,
but
yeah.
when I was doing it as a kid, I would, just come up with stories,
Mm,
and run through this, and jot down like 12 issues of an arc, like what would happen in that. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes it would just be individual stories. Sometimes I just come up with the character and never progress past that, because,
mm.
yeah, let's face it, the characters weren't all that good. But they were what I was doing, and they were new to me, basically.
Yeah.
And
There's
but there wasn't really any outlet for it, so it was just puttering. It was not something you dreamed, you ever thought you were going to do when you were a kid, unless you were, I guess, Jim Shooter. And
but where did that outlet eventually get to become,
ah,
a physical
um,
manifestation?
well, I mean, it was a couple of things. I mean, like I say, I mean, I never quite stop. You never quite stop doing it. It's not
Mm.
like you wake up one day and go, "Well, I'm not going to do this anymore." But in this case, it was underground comics,
Oh.
because I actually started in underground comics.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Um, I mean, I did and I didn't. My first work was for underground comics, and it was never published for underground comics. Um, because, well, I had puttered with stuff, like I say, but uh, I when I graduated high school, my the gift that I got for high school, and this is what I asked for, was a trip to the Phil Suling Con in New York, which was the big con at the time.
Mhm.
It took place over July 4th and July 4th weekend. And so I was 17 and I went to that, and it was just fabulous. I got to say, it was like the most fun. And I mean, I did things like I took a course from one night course from Jim Steranko on how to write comics,
Oh, wow.
and met various. I went out drinking with Denny O'Neil,
Oh,
who gave
wow.
me all these ideas for. I mean, basically, I guess I must have had some inclination toward writing comics at the time because Denny got the idea that I was interested in writing comics. So
Mhm.
I must have told him that I was. And so he was giving me advice on how to write comics. Of course, this is how to write comics in 1971, so
Mhm.
it's considerably different than later. But basically, he was telling me how to write how to write DC comics,
Mhm.
and it was good advice, and it still works for the most part. Um, but on the trip home, I ended up sitting I took an airplane home and ended up sitting on the airplane next to Dennis Kitchen, who at the time was running Kitchen Sink out of Milwaukee. So we were on, it was the same flight. And he was going back to Wisconsin too. And so I got to talking with him, and then he's actually invited me, I think he invited me to pitch something to him, if I was interested. So I ended up doing a this is very egotistical. I actually wrote Michael Moorcock and asked him if I could adapt Elric.
You unsolicited, you just called them up.
No, I wrote him. I
Oh,
wrote
yeah.
him. Wasn't about to call England. This was 1971.
Fair enough.
And I sent him a bunch of American underground comics, which he had no knowledge of. And
Mhm.
he said, well, sure, go, basically don't claim you own it. And sure, go ahead, feel free. And this is when Marvel was actually putting Elric in Conan, so they didn't have exclusive rights to him either.
Mhm.
And and so I got in touch with an artist named John Atkins Richardson, who was a professor someplace in Illinois, I think Carbondale, Illinois. And he drew the thing. So I adapted the um, the story of the Dreaming City from Elric and presented it to Dennis Kitchen, and Dennis was ready to publish it. And then that's like mid 1972, 73, I forget which year. It was either 72 or 73 by this point. And I think 73. And I went to see Dennis in his office. He had moved his offices to um, I forget what the name of the Plainfield,
Yeah, Illinois.
something like that, Wisconsin, which was the home of Ed Gein, if you know who Ed Gein was.
I sure do.
Um, Dennis had bought a farm up there and had converted the barn into his offices. And it was like 50 miles north of Madison. So I drove up to see him, and I was in his office at the time that the Supreme Court um, issued their ruling on profanity, on obscenity, which was that it was a matter for local standards, and there was no national standard on obscenity and pornography,
Mhm.
which pretty much killed the underground comics.
Mm.
Now, people misremember the underground comics now, but at the time, they were starting to outsell Marvel. I mean, the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers outsold Spider-Man by a dramatic margin. Um, so it was a place to go. And had underground comics continued, I probably would have just stayed in underground comics.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Eventually a little company, but at that point, the underground comics pretty much went out of business because if they didn't, they were facing obscenity charges from crazy DAs in every jurisdiction in America, and nobody had the money to, as Trump is finding out now, nobody had the money to defend against, 50,000 different lawsuits at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's funny you mention all that because like underground comics to the average comic reader, like they always just seem like R. Crumb and Harvey Pekar and those sort of guys. And that was sort of, it's all that really comes to mind. You kind of forget about ones like Fabulous Freak Brothers and those ones that like became huge and were like really
Well,
selling.
Richard Corbin was underground
Right,
comics.
yeah. And even Marvel was kind of doing their
I've
own.
started in underground comics.
Marvel started trying to do their own version of it too at one point. Like that at
Well,
one
that was a
point.
little later. That was when they were trying to figure out, everyone was trying to figure out how to capitalize on what they thought was the vestigial remains of the thing,
Right.
because that was several years. That was like 75, 76.
Oh, okay. So
Then
does
I
that
was
further?
editing that for Marvel comic book.
Hmm.
And but
Hmm.
that was very watered down underground comics stuff.
Yeah, it was trying to
You know,
capitalize on a
it wasn't really underground comics. It was just kind of like, hey, we're the nice version of it.
which sort of robs them of what made underground comics so
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Because
So,
underground comics, I mean, I mean, first you bought them in head shops. I mean, they were great because they had their own distribution system.
mhm,
They didn't have to go through newsstands. They didn't have to answer to anybody.
mm,
And you got them in the same place that you went and bought papers to roll pot with.
mhm.
You know, and there were fantastic, tons of them. They were just, it was a boom business for a while there.
Mm,
And they were and they were highly influential. They were why the Comics Code died,
mm,
because ultimately the Marvel and DC had to um I can't think of a good phrase for it. Let's say dirty up their comics to, they brought back vampires and werewolves, and they
mm,
had, more sexually explicit content, a little more, not too much more, but a little more sexually explicit content. And basically it was them and, Stan Lee started doing drug stories,
mhm,
which was the first place the Comics Code. I mean, basically, Stan Lee did a drug story in response to underground comics. I mean, but it was a Stan Lee drug story, of course, and but the code said that you couldn't do that,
mm.
so Marvel just left the code off those issues.
Yeah,
And a
yeah.
funny thing happened:
It didn't matter.
retailers kept stocking them.
Yeah,
Nobody
yeah,
paid any attention. And
yeah.
that's the start of what killed the code. And then they wanted to do more extreme, like I say, more extreme material to lure more people, keep people coming in. And the code eventually had to give and give and give until it was basically gone.
Mm,
So,
well,
and it took 20 years overall, but it that's what started killing the underground comics killed the code. And people don't remember this. People don't remember an awful lot about underground comics, and they were very influential. But anyway, so eventually the Elric thing was published by a little company out of Chicago called basically a fan press out of Chicago called Windy City Comics, and you can still find stuff like that once in a while out there.
cool.
I mean, they pop up in you know used comic shops once in a blue moon,
Well, that's sweet.
and yeah, so and then after that, I just say, I continued. I was in college by that point, and
What were you
but I
taking?
continued puttering around, and was doing some stuff for Star Reach, which was Mike Friedrich was publishing, and it just, one thing led to another, basically.
What did you
But
take in
yeah,
college? Was it something to do with writing or?
yeah. Well, I mean, I was, English major in
Uh,
college, and I was, taking writing course and stuff. I actually, by the time that I got to Marvel, I wasn't really that interested in writing for Marvel, which is funny. Um, it's funny to tell people that now, but I really kind of wasn't, and it was a gag because, see, the Chicago connection was a big deal for me because I would go down with a friend from Wisconsin named Bruce Ayers, who eventually started Capital City Comics, which was the big comic shop in Madison and still is after all these years. And he, when I was down there, I would met um, these guys publishing a magazine called CBR, CPR, which I thought was a hysterical. Contemporary Pictorial Literature was the
Oh,
what
wow.
CPR or CPL
Yes.
stood for. But these guys were it was published by Bob Layton, edited by Roger Stern.
Wow.
And so I got to be very good friends with them. And they invited me to write for the magazine, and I wrote reviews of stuff. I reviewed the initial Atlas releases and wasn't too impressed by them, except for the Scorpion and Wolf the Barbarian. The Scorpion was great, but anyway, and then I was going to be doing a regular column for them, but that magazine didn't last much longer after that point.
Hmm.
They did a companion magazine called Charlton Bullseye, which got them hooked into Charlton. But I had actually started writing a question series for them, a question revival series for
Oh,
them,
wow.
which would have been fun to do.
Well,
But
carrying on Denny O'Neill's sort of,
oh, I did a much different
yeah, yeah,
version of what
yeah,
Denny did.
yeah, yeah.
But mine was both closer to Ditko's version and a kind of a betrayal of Ditko's version at the same time. Not that I intended that, but that it was basically he gets fired by the TV. The boss who protects him at the TV station dies, and the evil son takes over.
Mhm.
The mendacious son takes over and fires him. So he ends up going to the one place that'll let him write whatever he wants to, which is a scandal rag, like the National Enquirer, their version of the National Enquirer. And so and that's basically what proceeds from there, because that's something, because they figure they've finally shut down this guy who's revealing all these, who's blabbing about all these scandals, and they only make it worse. And but that was kind of the concept behind my version of it.
Seems kind of true to the evolution of the Ayn Randianness of it from the first time around, right? And then later on.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of my, not that I
Yeah.
was a big Rand fan or anything like that.
No, but the definitely bled into the character.
But I could easily work with the concepts,
Mhm.
I mean, I did it years later when I worked with Ditko. I was asked to do a Shroud story at Marvel for Ditko, and came up with basically a plot that was just pure Ditko. I mean, I could do pure Ditko with no problem.
Mhm.
But anyway, but by the time that Roger and I had always kind of agreed that perhaps my attitude wasn't the right viewpoint for Marvel Comics, that I had perhaps my viewpoint was a little too skewed for Marvel Comics. But Roger eventually, Bob was the first to go. He became Dick Giordano's assistant and then started doing stuff for Charlton. But Nick Cuddy, who was the editor at Charlton then, was brought in John Byrne, and then Roger wrote a couple things with John there, and then Roger ended up becoming an assistant editor at Marvel. This was like 77, I think. And so he moved to New York, and I would go into New York, 2 or 3 times a year, and generally crash on Roger's couch. And so Easter in 1978, I go in and I call up Roger and say, "Hey, I'm coming in over Easter. Is it okay if I sleep on your couch?" And he said, "Yeah, when are you getting here?" I said, "Sunday night." And he said, "Oh, good. Be ready to write an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 Monday morning." And I went, "What?" Because it was like, I was not, it was like, it turned out that he had just been promoted to editor, because Jim had been promoted to editor-in-chief, and he moved him up. And this is not physically possible, but at the time, Roger told me that when he took over Marvel 2-in-1 as editor, it was 18 months behind. So they basically just needed material. He didn't care what I wrote. They just needed material. So I thought, okay, well, I'll write a story for Marvel Comics. This will be
Well,
fun.
what was the skewing of your perception that they thought wouldn't fit with Marvel? Was it just like you
Oh,
had a
I had
more
all kinds of weird ideas.
yeah?
Which
Well,
a lot of which have ended up in the comics and not altogether from me, but rather because we used to all talk, I mean, all of us
hmm.
used to chat about stuff all
Oh
the
yeah.
time. So so you get strange stuff. Well, like I would ask questions like um I brought up stuff like just following the logic of the comics,
Hmm.
like Peter Parker's uncle was a fence. Because nothing else would explain why this burglar in Manhattan would end up in a little area, in the attic of a little area of wherever, basement, whatever it was,
Hmm.
of of a house just out of the blue end
Yeah.
up in this house
Yeah.
in Queens, in some little area of Queens. And what was he doing there? Why would he pick that place? And the answer is Uncle Ben was a fence. That's why he went there. The deal went bad, and that's why he shot Uncle Ben. Well, this skews the entire. He said we
Of-
cannot use that. He says,
yeah.
they cannot do that. That'll completely,
I think they found some
alter
other
the
reason
essence.
later to explain it, like there was secretly treasure buried in the basement or something. The criminals that he knew about. I don't know. There's something dumb they added later.
It's not, yeah, I know they
Yeah.
did something, and I have always suspected that that was partly in response to me bringing up these uncomfortable questions.
They're like, someone's going to ask this question again someday. We need to be prepared for that. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if Marv wrote that story, and I don't know if Marv had any knowledge of anything I said at that point.
Yeah.
And but anyway, I brought up and the guys I would normally be talking to on this stuff would be Roger Stern and John Byrne. So,
Mhm.
things circulated from there. Um, and one other thing I brought up was that Dr. Doom was not Reed Richards. It was not Kang's ancestor, but Reed Richards was.
Mm.
And I forget what the evidence in the comics was, but that became sort of, and that ended up eventually with John making Reed's father um, the ancestor of, basically it's not Reed isn't his great great grandfather, but they're like distant cousins or something.
Right. Yeah.
But so little things like that. There was some Batman thing that I came up with that ended up like years later becoming part of the canon of DC, and it was like that. I always wondered if that was connected or not. So, you know,
It must be
but
tough
whether
being
it
in the
wasn't,
industry and having so many connections with so many people and never sure, right? Because who knows what
yeah,
you say somewhere
exactly.
in a conversation that winds up somewhere else or someone overhears, and the next thing you know, years later, it's something they always wanted to do, right? Yeah.
Or it could be complete parallel development and had nothing to do with me at
That's
all.
fair enough. Yeah, of the ether somewhere, the Gestalt. But
You have to avoid being too egotistical about this stuff.
no,
So
I think as a writer, that kind of it's a little bit of that in you, though. You have to be a writer, I think.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah.
But so what was the so you started with the 2-in-1 project for Marvel
Yeah, so
then?
I did Marvel 2-in-1, and it was a goofy story. I thought, well, let's have some fun with this. So, the character, he said, pick any character in just pick a character and write a thing story with him. And so I decided on a whim to do Moon Knight, although I had no personal interest in Moon Knight. And the reason I did it was so I could write it in the first person,
Hmm. Oh,
because
right.
Moon Knight's secret identity was Stephen Grant.
Yeah, of course.
Which was completely coincidental. It had nothing to do with me. I want to go on the record. People are always asking me this. It had nothing to do with me. All of Moon Knight's, as far as I know, all of Moon Knight's secret identities were named after Doug Mensch's college roommates.
Oh, so he had a Steven and a Grant.
So he had no,
Yeah.
he had Stephen Grant was a college, no, Mark Spector, Jake Lockley, and Stephen Grant were, as far as I know, all Doug Mensch's, at least this is what I've been told, were all Doug Mensch's college roommates.
Man,
So
I'm
he just,
surprised there's a surname that's Spectre out there somewhere. That's cool. Yeah,
I know. Well, I mean,
seems like
but you
it.
don't
Yeah,
run across that. I mean,
yeah, I
there's
guess so.
been senators named Specter, Arlen
Right, I
Specter.
guess Phil Spector, I suppose. I never thought of that either, but yeah, makes sense. Yeah, interesting. All right.
But I wrote it in the first person just because I thought this would be really funny to have Moon Knight have Moon Knight be the guy credited, Moon
Yeah,
Knight's
yeah.
secret identity be the guy credited to tell a Moon Knight story.
Oh, that's clever.
And uh and so that was just kind of a laugh. I figured that was the only thing I'd ever do for Marvel. And so I went in with Roger on the Monday morning, and he stuck me at a typewriter, and so I spent a couple hours typing up a plot. That's how much effort I put into it. I didn't work out any
Hmm.
extreme plot details or anything. It was pretty much meat and potatoes Marvel team up story or Marvel two-in-one story. And so he read it. I handed it to him. He read it over. Made a few notes, handed it back to me. I went back to the typewriter, made the corrections he asked for, handed him the thing. He read it and handed me a voucher. So I filled out the voucher, went home, figured, okay, well, that's the end of that. And about 3 weeks later, I get a check in the mail. And it was not for an awful lot of money.
Hmm.
They did not pay all that much at the time. It was, I think, $18 a page when I started. So it was like $256 for the work.
Hmm.
And I looked at that and I thought, this is not that much money, but it's still a lot more than I'm making right now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I thought maybe I'm being too hasty with this thing
Hmm.
because there were things that I wanted to do. And so I thought, well, I've got an Ian. I would probably be stupid not to take advantage of this because,
Hmm.
for one thing, it was my ticket out of Madison, and if I had something to go to New York for, I would go to New York, which I did. So that's how that started. But I wasn't really dreaming of writing for Marvel Comics at that point. That's something that I was dreaming about maybe 10 years earlier.
Mm. Wow, that's crazy. So, I mean, obviously, with some of your output and just some of the ideas of the saying you had a skewed vision of stuff, I assume the Punisher was a pretty decent fit because he has a more real world sort of sensibility than a lot of regular
Yeah.
comic stuff would.
Well, I'll tell you the pun that was a CPL connected thing actually.
Oh, really?
Because there was a convention that was being done in 1976 in the week between New Year's and Christmas. Um, I forget. Well, I think it was the weekend before New Year's. And so I decided I would go to that. I wanted to go to that because it sounded like fun. And I told Bob and Roger I was going to it, and Bob said, well, you got to stay with Duffy Voland, who was from, I think, Indiana, and had worked on CPL, had done stuff for CPL, but was not by then in the Marvel production department. And apparently, his house was his apartment in the wilds, and I mean the wilds of Brooklyn, because it was real fun getting there. Um, Apparently people slept, crashed on his couch when they went to New York. So I figured, okay, I called up. I had no idea who Duffy Voland was, but he said, sure, come on. Duffy was a very friendly guy. Sure, come on. And so I went in there and he said, well, you got to, Marv Wolfman was the editor of Marvel at the time. And he was the only one in there for the week because it was shut down for a week. So he figured he would use the time to get work done with no distractions.
Hmm.
And but Duffy said, "Well, you have to pitch some stuff to Marvel if you're going to stay here." And I said, "Oh, what am I going to pitch to Marvel?" He said, "Well, it doesn't matter. Just come up with stuff, and I'll get you in to see Marv Wolfman, and you can pitch to Marvel." And so I sat in his apartment for a day with a typewriter people are always giving me typewriters to work on.
I'm gonna say
And
a lot of typewriters just pop up in your story.
everybody has typewriters. Yeah. In those days, everybody had typewriters.
Yeah, of course.
Um, so I typed up 3 plots. One was, he said, pick characters that no one's using and that you like, and come up with storylines, come up with series ideas for them. So I did. I can't remember who the third one was, but one of them was the Black Knight, which I always liked, and one of them was the Punisher, which I didn't really have that much interest in the Punisher, but I wanted to do, I thought of a story that I wanted to do for him. I wanted
Well,
to cover certain inconsistencies in the case, things that didn't quite make sense to me in the character.
at this point, he was only in the Spider-Man comics, right? He didn't have his own
I
thing.
think they were just, well, I think it was just before they started doing the magazine version.
Right, of course.
So they had done some stuff that was actually pretty much in line with what I wanted to do with him. But he was a more realistic character, and I thought, this would be fun to work with a more realistic character and do, that kind of material. And so I typed up plots for them, and I went in to see Marv, and Marv was very friendly. Marv remembers nothing about this at all, which I don't see why he would. And so I went in, and Marv was obviously just doing this as a favor to Duffy, and was like, and he read through them, and he said, "Well, we're kind of doing things with those characters, so but thanks for coming in, And that was pretty much, and that was what I didn't really expect any more than that. Again, it was an interesting experience,
Mm-hmm.
So I pretty much took everything as interesting experiences at the time, and then I went on with my life, but the Punisher story that I did eventually was the same story that I pitched to Marv. So I actually came up with that 10 years before it
Oh,
came
wow.
out. Almost 10 years. Yeah. And then when Marvel started doing miniseries, and I was advocating them doing miniseries from the instant that I got up there, which was aggravating to a lot of people. And because I thought that was the wave of the future. The miniseries was the wave of the future. And every time, once they did start doing miniseries, I went around to pretty much every editor in the company and trying to get them to do a Punisher miniseries. And every one of them was going, "Why do you want to do the Punisher? Jeez." Literally every single one of them. Marvel had no faith in the character whatsoever.
Wow.
And but the Punisher miniseries that I did was basically the same story, except for the first issue, which the prison issue was not part of it, but the rest of it was the story I pitched to Marv in pretty much in every detail.
Wow.
Well, it was not significantly different. It was the ideas behind it and the basic plot were the same thing. So but that was one thing that I actually thought, because once I had written it up for Marv, excuse me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Once I had written it up for Marv, I thought, wow, I really kind of like this story. And the Black Knight story that I did was eventually published in Marvel Fanfare. I started doing that for Al Milgrom in 1979, and it got published in like 1993 or something. Finished. It was plotted all plotted, and the second issue was drawn by John Buscema in 1979 or 1980.
Wow.
And it was finally published in like 1993 in Marvel Fanfare because it went into his drawer. But that was a long series that I had pitched for the Black Knight set in the Middle Ages, which would have been basically the Black Knight as Conan in the Middle Ages.
That sounds pretty great. Definitely behind that. Well, that is very cool. And I noticed just looking through, the run of your career, you've had a lot of great books through a lot of big companies and a lot of sort of innovative changes here and there. I noticed, did you work with Peter Gillis on something?
I worked parallel with Peter Gillis.
Okay, I saw
I don't know
his
what.
name come up somewhere when I was doing a little research. And
You might be thinking of First Adventures because he had a strip in it, and I was doing Whisper shorts in it.
right, yeah, Whisper's the female ninja character that you created
But
with
I
Kathy.
knew Peter from, our early days. We both of us landed at Marvel at pretty much the same time.
He's one of those people. I know my producer that reached out to you. Uh, he was talking to Gillis about trying to get him on the show. I was always a big fan of Strike Force Morituri. It was like one of my favorite series growing up. And when eBay became a thing, I think the first thing I bought was that entire run, so I could get all the issues I was missing. But it's a dream someday, hopefully. But um, I noticed you worked on I remember your column as well from Comic Book Resources, which was kind of an interesting series that you had done, which was sort of pulling back some of the inner workings of the comic industry. Did you get any
Oh yeah.
blowback? Did you get much blowback from anybody for doing that?
Not really. Not
No.
really. Mostly I got people saying from inside the business saying, man, it's really great to see someone actually tell people what the business is like. I just decided I wasn't particularly interested in promoting any of the myths of the business. So,
Mm. Well, it also like keeping things like that quiet, or at least, having some strange, like, expected decorum around sort of dealings in an industry like that. It's just another tool they use to sort of, you know, exploit other people that don't know any better, right? So
well, I don't think that was,
I wouldn't
it's
say it's that
been
bad.
a
Like
while
that
since
sounds really nefarious, but I mean the
been a
idea that
while since that was a conscious effort, but
yeah.
it's just, people like things to look better than they are, and it's
Mm.
pretty chaotic.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get a lot from talking to folks like yourself who've been in and out of the system, like the big comic system. Is everyone thinks it's this well-oiled machine. You kind of realize that almost it, like everything else, is made up of people, who are flawed and whatever. So to assume it just goes differently in that industry, when it's a nightmare in almost every other one, it's like why?
This is when people keep saying, always hear people saying, why are movies so bad? Why do they release so many bad movies?
Hmm.
And there's two answers for that, which is one, no one sets out to make a bad movie.
No.
And if you knew what it takes, everything it takes to make a movie, that they release bad ones isn't the surprise. That they have any movies at all to release is the surprise.
Yeah, it's more surprising they make good ones sometimes. You're like,
Yeah, I mean, it's
yeah,
if you're lucky, it's good.
yeah.
Because there's so many things that can go so wrong all the way along, but the comics is pretty much the same thing. It takes a lot of folk work and focus and luck to get them out there. I mean, it's very difficult to get comics out,
Hmm.
you know, very
Yeah.
difficult to sell one, It's like,
Well, speaking of, I guess your work as time went on, I noticed you wrote some Hardy Boys books, which is interesting to me as well.
yes.
Which just how long ago would it have been that you have done those?
Mid 80s.
Okay, so
Mid 80s to early 90s. I think I did 7 of them altogether.
I was always kind of curious about that because I'd recently watched the movie Flowers in the Attic. And VC Andrews had written like 4 books before I think she
Right.
passed away, and then somebody else has written. Various writers over the years have written all the VC Andrews books, and you yourself was under the pseudonym Franklin Dixon. So I just like what is that system like? Is it like, I assume when you take the job, it's like any job, and they're just like, here's your.
Well, this is being done through a company called Megabooks.
Mhm.
Megabooks? Yeah, Megabooks, which came out of the owner and editor on it was a co-owner and editor on it was a woman named Pat Fortunato, who was originally I met as the editor of the Electric Company magazine, where I was doing Spidey Super Stories
Oh, right,
live
yeah.
pages for. And so I only dealt with her. I mean, she dealt with Bantam was I think Bantam
Hmm.
was the publisher. She dealt with Bantam and but I only dealt with her, so it was like smooth as silk. It was funny because the original and they got more and more difficult to write as it went along because it started out they wanted to um, turn them into basically a two-boy war against crime series, you
Oh,
know,
okay.
in semi imitation of the Executioner, because
Oh yeah,
the men's books were all hot stuff at the time.
be quite a
So
transition.
someone somewhere along the line got the idea of revitalizing them as the Hardy Boys as sort of a two-boy war. This is my expression, two-boy war against crime.
Like a
Um,
gritty gun play and all this sort of stuff too.
a little grittier, a
All
little
right,
tough. And
interesting.
so that was the thing. And so they gave me a list of things to list of guidelines, a little list of guidelines for the first one that I did, which I completely ignored, and wrote a book, Cult of Crime, I think. Yeah, Cult of Crime, which was uh, Frank Hardy goes infiltrating a cult to
I
res
gotta look this up. This sounds great.
and so I mean I just basically did what I wanted to, and I mean I didn't go too outrageous because I
Hmm.
knew it was the Hardy Boys. You got to have some idea of your audience,
Of
but
course, yeah.
then they got that and they went back and they instead of making me correct things, they went back and rewrote parts of the first and second book in the series to fit what I had
Oh,
done.
nice.
And so I took that as kind of a compliment. And I didn't really have it was the hardest part of those was just coming up with plots that would keep me interested long enough to write a whole book.
I imagine it'd be tough after a while, especially with something like that to come up with something.
Well, the thing with that was that as time went on, they got more and more um, concerned about the updated aspects of it. So, because in the first one they could use guns. In the second one, they can hold guns, but I mean, eventually the next thing I hear is that they can hold guns and threaten people with guns, but they can't shoot guns in the thing. The next one, they can't use guns, but they can still use knives. They can't use knives, and it's basically it gets all go by the time I got done with the last one, it got to the point where, well, they're not allowed to hit anybody. It's
Oh,
like
wow.
so it's an action series with no action in it by that because because well the culture at the time, everyone was suddenly going crazy about, oh, cartoons are bad for kids, et cetera, et cetera. And
Mm.
and everything's going to corrupt your kids, et cetera. And so they were having their natural panic over it. And not mega books, but bantam books. Publishers are always the ones who have the panic over it.
Oh, yeah.
And
100%.
so that kind of wore it out. And eventually it was basically they gave up the Hardy Boys case files books in favor of Nancy Drew Hardy Boys
Yeah.
team ups, and which I very unpolitically correctly referred to the Nancy Boys books. And I was supposed to write one of those and could just never get it right. I couldn't get Nancy Drew right, so.
Yeah. Um, I noticed you worked also with it says you collaborated with Warren Ellis on the X-Men comic for
Oh
Marvel
yeah,
Comics.
yeah.
What was working with Warren like?
Oh, Warren, it was a breeze. I always got along fine with Warren.
Hmm. I feel like your guys' both of your styles kind of complement each other in the way that like,
I
well,
wouldn't
in a
say
way,
that.
he tends to go really far off the other way, but his really deep human stuff is
Yeah.
something that I feel like you two would really connect with.
Well, I mean, I have kind of, I can manifest the crazy idea philosophy if I have to.
The inner magic, the magician, the English
Well, no. I mean, it's like I forget what the phrase was, but it was like Grant Morrison was a big advocate of it. It's not like I forget. It's like mad ideas, the mad
oh
ideas. I mean,
yeah,
I can come up with mad ideas with no problem. I have
yeah.
no problem. So,
Yeah, that's
so,
it.
I mean, it was basically a place to do mad ideas. So that's fine. That's what I did.
That's awesome.
So no, he was brought on by Jason I've never known whether it's pronounced Liebig or Liebig, and I hope it's Liebig because Liebig is a bit on the nose for an editor. But Jason created the Counter X line of Marvel books,
Right.
using, and so he was brought on to create to reconceive the books on that line. And so he brought on writers. So he asked me to do X-Men. And so yeah, so I got the first one, I got a pretty elaborate plot from him and followed that. Second one, I got a sketchier plot from that and did half of what he did and half of what I wanted. And then the third one, it was basically by that point I was on my own. So,
Mm.
it was that was but it was fine, I mean, I never had any problem with Warren. So,
Awesome. I don't want to keep all your time. I just had a couple more questions for you.
oh, that's all right.
Cool. The adaptation you did of the Frank Miller original scripts of RoboCop, I noticed they deviated significantly from the movies in some ways. Was that because the
Well, they
script?
did because the movies deviated from the script.
That's what I was curious about. If the script was, the movies had changed what the script was
Oh
drastically.
yeah, well that's why they did the comics. That's why they wanted to do the comics because the scripts were considerably different than the movies that had been done.
Mhm.
And I remember Frank telling me about the going through the process of Hollywood, of sitting there in rooms and people going, "Hey, why don't we change this?" And it's like, well, but if you change this, then it changes something that either affects something that happens down the line. That
Mhm.
it's basically a lot of people in Hollywood come up with ideas for what they want to do for changes in movies without just thinking, and they always think of it in the micro moment rather than how it affects the overall script.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons that you end up with a lot of bad movies.
It's always
That
arbitrary and
they
dumb
don't,
too.
that they don't think it out in advance and that they make changes like, oh, I don't like that. What if we change, we should change this. And, what if it's you know, what if it's a light bulb? You know,
I
that kind of
once I
thing.
once heard a podcast them describe it because I can't remember who it was, but it was some movie that was a huge movie that made a ton of money. It might have been something that one James Cameron had done early on in his career or something. But anyway, he said something about how every executive kind of wants to put their mark on it. They want to say that they had something to do with the
Yeah,
success of
that's
the
pretty
movie.
much it. Yeah, well, they have to justify their jobs, don't they?
Yeah. So at one point they told him like, why don't they give this character a dog? And he said instead of just saying no, that's stupid, because it's the dumbest idea I ever thought of. Some writer was saying it was the smartest advice he ever got. He said, I'll work on that," and then went away. And then at the studio, they came back, and then when the movie aired, and the executive came up to him, "So what happened with the dog thing?" And he goes, "Well, we tried, and it just didn't work." Don't just shoot him down. Just say you'll try it, and then at least
that's if they even remember what they said.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of
But
that, I mean, one of your
But anyway,
comics.
so that's what happened. So he would sit in the room and listen to people making suggestions for this script. It's like not an inconsiderable number of people in the
Mhm.
room.
Oh
So
yeah.
everyone's having their little say and the thing. So what you end up seeing on the screen is considerably different than well, I actually have never sat down and compared them. So, but that's why they wanted to do the books. And this was a rare case where they said just, this is Avatar Press publishing them.
Yep.
And they just said, take as much space as you need.
Nice.
Just break it down. We want the whole thing, take as much space as you need. So it ended up being like 9 or 10 issues of run, So,
Yeah.
so that was fine, and it was interesting, but it was easy enough to transfer over.
Hmm.
Frank thinks very visually, obviously. So
Well, speaking of Hollywood getting involved with comic projects, I noticed one of your comics, Two Guns, became the Mark Wahlberg Denzel Washington film. So what was the
yeah.
process of that coming about?
Well, I had actually come up with that idea for comics years before, like sometime in the mid '90s,
Mhm.
and no one was in. This was when comics were in free fall, like they frequently are. And
Yeah.
but this was when the bubble was bursting. And so absolutely nobody was interested in doing crime books at the time. But this was it was just like an idea that I really wanted to do. It was like the Punisher miniseries. Like I held on to that. I worked that like a dog with a bone. And it was just always in the back of my mind. And then at one point I ended up with no work and I thought, and nothing, sitting there on my plate. And I thought, I'm going to write this up as a movie. So I wrote it up as a film script. And this is like, by this point, it was late 90s. And I actually got in touch with some studios and went to Hollywood to pitch it around. And this is a fun story. I drove in on a Sunday night and woke up the next morning, took a shower, came out when I was drying off, turned on the TV, and people were flying planes into skyscrapers in New York City. And I thought, I've seen this before. Because it was, if you don't remember, there was a spinoff from X-Files called
The Lone Gunman. And I was a big fan of that series. Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why are they running this? Why are they rerunning this episode at 7 in the morning?
Oh, no.
And at that point, Hollywood shut down.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, we can't, and everybody said, oh, we can't do we're not going to be buying any action stuff for a long time. So, we can't do anything with violence now because America is going to go wholesale against violence, which, lasted around 10 minutes. And
what stories are you going to tell? Like almost every story has violence in it somehow.
Romantic comedies or something, but
I guess, yeah.
But anyway, so then it went into a drawer, and I was trying to figure out what to do with it. And I had apparently shown it to Ross Ritchie, who I knew from Malibu Comics at one point, because Ross was starting a boom in like 2006, and said, and asked me if I had ever done anything with it, and if I hadn't, could he publish it as a comic? And since I hadn't done anything, I said, sure. And so I gave him the movie rights with that. I mean, I didn't give him the movie rights, but he had the rights to go shopping the movie around because that was the other part of his thing, is that he wanted to, use the comics company to leverage his way into movies. And he took it around and just shopped it around until it bought, and apparently got a lot of interest in it. By that point, 2007, 2008, there was a lot of interest in it, and it just kind of moved on from there. And we went through all kinds of permutations. It was very funny. At one point, he told me that he said that George Clooney and Matt Damon were looking to do a project together, and that they were interested in this. And I thought, oh, okay. Now, my philosophy, which I learned a long time ago, which I recommend to everybody, is in terms of Hollywood, nothing happens until it happens. So don't get excited about anything. It's like in 1993, I think it was, I published a miniseries through Dark Horse called Enemy, which Mike then sold as a TV pilot to Fox TV. And he's telling me about this deal, and I'm going, okay, well, And he suddenly stops and says, "You don't sound very excited, Steve." I said, "Oh, well, no, I'm excited. Don't get me wrong, I'm excited, but when this gets on the air and lasts long enough to go into syndication, and you come to me with a syndication check for $1.5 million, then you'll see excited."
Yeah.
know?
Well, it's a realistic approach,
I think you just have to keep everything kind of, and this does piss people off because a lot of people want to see you excited about stuff.
Yeah.
But
Well, there's nothing wrong with pragmatism, especially in
when it
Hollywood.
happens, it's exciting, but a lot of stuff just never happens. And you get to a certain point where no stuff has not happened, where you kind of take the attitude of, or you should take the attitude of, don't get excited until it happens. I mean, I see people announcing that they've had movies optioned, right?
Hmm.
And it's like a 3-figure option or whatever. Okay, well, here's the thing about that is that you don't get paid that money. You can make that deal, but you don't get paid that money until the thing starts going.
Hmm.
You know, an option could be you could have an option for $300,000 on something, but you might only get $5,000 up front.
Hmm.
They might only pay you $500. There's no limit to how low they can go to get you to sign the thing to make the deal. Because once you sign to make the deal, that's when they go start making their deal, and
Yeah.
that's where the money comes into it, is when they make their deal. But when the thing starts filming, that's when they have to pay you the option money.
Hmm.
And most things never start filming.
Yeah. It's in development hell forever. Yeah.
So it doesn't really people. I for a long time there, I was seeing people going, "Oh, Leonardo DiCaprio's company has optioned our comic." And it's like, have you looked on the IMDb page for Leonardo DiCaprio's production company? Because they have like 50 projects they're working on. And what that means is that they've got it there and they're going around and talking to people. It doesn't mean they're going to make movies out of them.
Yeah.
It means that they're trying to make movies out of them, and most things just never happen. I mean, it's true in comics. Most things, a lot of people seem to think that at this point in my life, I can just call someone up and get them to publish whatever I want. And in fact, I'd say probably 3% of what I pitch, I get made.
No.
It's not a huge percentage. And I don't know anyone outside of maybe, Frank Miller, of course, can pretty much get whatever he wants, and I don't hold that against Frank. He's earned it.
Hmm.
But there's very few people who can just snap their fingers and get things made,
Yeah.
because there's still a lot, even though it's comics, there's still a lot of money involved. I mean, it still costs money to get comics made. If
Oh,
it didn't, I'd be, have people out there, because I'd have tons of stuff out there, because then I wouldn't have to worry about artists getting paid or anything like that.
yeah.
And it's still costs a decent amount of money to get stuff made. So,
Yeah.
so you just have to take everything with a grain of salt.
But what are you working on now? Like what's coming down the pipe that you can talk about?
Oh, well, let's see. Well, I am doing a whisper graphic novel through Comic Mix, which will be going to Kickstarter at some point.
Nice.
Rick Burchett is drawing it.
Oh, cool.
If you know who Rick Burchett is, and a former first artist. And he's drawing it at the moment. So when he gets a ways further into it, I'm not really sure what the schedule is on the Kickstarter, because I'm not running it. But this is kind of me dipping my toe into Kickstarting. And what else am I doing? I've got a lot of things I can't talk about.
Yeah. It did mention on your wiki that you were working on a sequel to Two Guns. Is that as a film, or is that a comic project?
Oh, that's already been published. That was
that was the comic version. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there was a related to a sequel to the film, so I was going to say they better get rolling on that if if they want Denzel.
Well, I don't know. It comes up once in a while, but
Yeah.
again, who knows?
Yeah.
Things can go years and years without a sequel, and then suddenly they'll want to do a sequel on things. But
Yeah.
if they do, I'm happy to take the check. But until then, I'm not holding my breath. So
That's
that's the
awesome.
thing. Don't hold your breath. That's my recommendation to people: is don't hold your breath. Keep working, but don't hold your breath.
Yeah, a healthy dose of pragmatism can't hurt
Yeah.
for sure. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for being on the show. I'm a huge fan of your work, and it was a real pleasure to talk to you. So,
Oh, thank you.
and I look forward to seeing what's next.
Okay, thank you.
All right, have a good night.
You too.
There it is, my chat with Stephen Grant. What a great talk, eh? He had a lot of cool insights into like industry stuff and a bygone era and how he kind of got into books and it's sort of stuff that doesn't happen like that anymore. And it's really cool to hear other people's, stories and how their journey started. So very thankful for Stephen to give us his time and to come onto the show and chat with me about that. On our next episode, we're going to be talking to Becca Kinsey, who is an independent comic creator out of Ontario. And great talk with her as well. Already recorded, so it's in the can. But yeah, it's a great little chat, and it's fun talking with someone that's so aligned on interests in like horror movies and that sort of stuff as well. So it's a lot. If you like those episodes where we just sort of talk about, have you seen this, have you seen that, and get into some of the debates about that, this is one of them, and that's a lot of fun. So be sure to tune into that episode in 2 weeks' time. But in the meantime, stay safe, have fun, and read some comics. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.